U.S. Code Subtitle A, Chapter 13. Renumbered. Federal aid for state and government. Okay, here we go. Renumbered. 240A to 240F. Federal aid for state governments. Whenever there is an insurrection in any state against its government, the President may, upon the request of its legislature or of its governor, if the legislature cannot be convened, called into federal service such of the militia of the other states in the number requested by that state, and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to suppress the insurrection. Okay, so here it is saying that he needs approval of the state governor, and he may call upon the militia of any other state for the numbers that's requested by that state to send armed forces into that state. But he does, according to this section, he needs the state approval. And this is not the Insurrection Act, though, itself. This is federal aid for state governments. This is, it is part of the insurrection. Part 1, Insurrection, Chapter 13. I do remember in here, though, where I thought I read something else on that. So let's see what else we got. Okay, right here. Second one. Whenever the President considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblage or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion. So here, the first one was like a rebellion within the state against local authorities, state government. The state may call for the aid of the federal government, and he may send troops to squash that rebellion in the state. But this one here goes even deeper. This one here basically is not saying he needs permission of the state. Whenever the President considers that unlawful obstructions, so this is when the President considers that there are unlawful obstructions, rebellion against the authority of the United States. So no, it doesn't mean that just because you're out protesting, but there is a difference, remember, between protesting and burning cities and riots. So he has sent in ICE to actually go after illegal immigrants. And you have local authority and state authorities that is obstructing. They are actually obstructing U.S. law. They are in a rebellious state. Yes, he can call in the troops underneath the Insurrection Act. And he does not need their permission to send them in. Matter of fact, I think if I remember reading something here about there's no judicial review on it. 253. Interference with state and federal law. The President, by using the militia or armed forces or both, or by any other means, shall take such measures as he considers necessary to suppress in a state any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy, if it, okay, so this is where the if it comes in. 1, so hinders the execution of the laws of the United States so hinders the execution of the laws of that state, which hence the state would call upon him, and of the United States within the state, that any part or class of its people is deprived of a right, privilege, immunity, or protection named in the Constitution and secured by law, and the constituted authorities of that state are unable, fail, or refuse to protect that right, privilege, or immunity, or to give that protection. Can you guys think of any? I mean, we didn't even need the recent events for this to be enacted. This could have been enacted under Biden. This could have been enacted under Trump in his first term whenever the Summer of Love was happening. You guys remember that? Yeah, the officials, local officials, were not doing anything, and people were being deprived of their rights. They were being deprived of their rights of rioters in the streets that was looting, burning, stealing people's property, and nothing was being done by it from the local government. And same thing's kind of going on in Portland right now, and that's against ICE agents. You don't even need this to be against a federal entity. This goes by if they cannot give that protection, or they refuse to protect that right. Well, when you have looters going into stores, the stores have a right to their property. The stores have a right to their merchandise. The looters that are stealing it does not have the right. They are breaking laws left and right. And then what do you have? You have the local police that's just standing down, not doing anything, or there's not enough of them to enforce. You have the cities that say, no, we're not going to enforce the police. So you have a conspiracy, actually, to deprive rights. I think that's what they're going to actually use in Florida with Trump. But you can do this on the average city where they're not enforcing the laws to prevent people from stealing out of these stores. You're depriving the businesses of their rights. Opposer obstructs the execution of laws of the United States or impedes the course of. Let's get to that. Or impedes the course of justice under those laws. So right now we're talking about illegal immigrants, and we're talking about laws being broken. These people had come in illegally, and we'll get into another session. Sorry about the background noise. We'll get into another session. Let's finish this here up. In any situation covered by Clause 1, the state shall be considered to have denied the equal protection of laws secured by the Constitution. So if a state or a local government and the state fails to act on the local government, that is denying the rights of the people to be secure in their persons, papers, and effects. The stores, that's their property. That's their merchandise. The city is failing to have arrests done. Even the judicial system is failing to appropriately put these people in prison or jail. They're just turning them loose. I think they're going to be in for a big wake-up call if he actually enacts the Insurrection Act. Let's see if there's anything else here. Proclamation to disperse. So this is where the president has to give warning before he actually before he actually invokes the Insurrection Act. Whenever the president considers it necessary to use the militia or the armed forces under this chapter. You notice, I'm sorry, I've been listening to some other people also on this, and they're right, 100% right. You notice it doesn't say a judge. It doesn't say whenever a judge or whenever the judicial system considers it necessary to use the militia. It doesn't say that at all. And yes, you have these judges trying to rule against Trump about using the troops and stuff. He hasn't activated this clause yet. So they do have the right to some extent. But once he activates this, there is no judicial review on it. They're not able to go there. Whenever the president considers it necessary to use the militia or the armed forces under this chapter, or he shall, by proclamation, immediately order the insurgents to disperse and retire peaceably to their abodes within a limited time. He has to give a time limit. It doesn't state. I'm sure the courts could rule on that portion if he does not give a legitimate time limit. But he doesn't have to give much of a time limit. He could give a 24, 48-hour time limit to disperse, and to disperse immediately within so much time. And he could put that message out there, and he could actually have that air horned from the ICE facility for the protesters outside. If they're in the city still causing ruckus and the police... Look, let's say that he actually invokes this, and he does it for the federal facilities, and he starts giving this proclamation for them to disperse. If they start rioting in the streets and that type of stuff, he can extend the proclamation to that, and then he could actually still send in the forces to put down the riots. Doesn't matter where they're at. They don't have to be at a federal building. They can actually be at the Targets, at Walmarts. They can be anywhere as long as they're looting and stealing and the police force is not doing anything about it. He can declare an insurrection, and he can send in the troops. And there's no court that can actually hear the case. They'll try, I guarantee you. As you can see, they will definitely try. But he doesn't have to listen to him. He doesn't have to abide by it. And the penalties is kind of severe underneath this. Here we go. For purpose of this chapter, the term state includes Guam and the Virgin Islands. So it includes any state, and it includes these two territories. So it does include Guam and the Virgin Islands. Don't think it includes Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not mentioned here, but it does include Guam and the Virgin Islands. And I think that is it on that one. Okay, the Insurrection Act of 1807 is a U.S. federal law that empowers the President of the United States to nationally deploy the U.S. military and to federalize the National Guard units of the individual states in specific circumstances such as suppression of civil disorder, of insurrection, and of armed rebellion against the federal government of the U.S. This isn't quite true. It does not say armed rebellion in the Insurrection Act. Nowhere did it say armed rebellion. It just said rebellion. So they are not right in this. Of course, it comes from Wikipedia. So, to suppress civil disorder, so he can suppress civil disorder, of insurrection, and of armed rebellion, which it does not mean armed rebellion. It just says rebellion. It doesn't say armed rebellion, against the federal government of the U.S. The Insurrection Act provides a statutory exception to the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. that limits the president's deploying the U.S. military to enforce either civil law or criminal law within the United States. So remember, if he actually invokes the Insurrection Act, posse comitatus is out the door for a little while. After invoking and before exercising the powers authorized under the Insurrection Act, Title 10, requires the publication of a presidential proclamation whereby the U.S. President formally orders the dispersion of the people committing civil unrest or armed rebellion. Once again, it did not say armed rebellion. It said rebellion. So, we can read that over in the other section I had done. It's according to the act itself, it just says rebellion. The armed rebellion is nowhere in there. It just says rebellion. The Defense Department guideline defines Homeland Defense as a constitutional exception to the restrictions of a Posse Comitatus Act. Therefore, the political, military, and police measures necessary to protect the national security from... Come on. From external threats are exceptions to the restrictions of the Act. Purpose and content. The Act empowers the U.S. President to call into service U.S. Armed Forces and the National Guard. When requested by a state's legislature or governor, if the legislature cannot be convened to address an insurrection against the state, to address an insurrection in any state which makes it impracticable to enforce the law of the United States or the state, or to address an insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy in any state which deprives the constitutionality secured rights, and where the state is unable or fails or refuses to protect said rights. So that's what he'll draw upon right there. It'll be the latter. In 1807, the Act placed the earlier Calling Forth Act of 1792, which had allowed for federalization of the state militias with similar language, that allowed either for federalization of state militias or use of their regular army or armed forces in the case of rebellion against a state government. The Act did not provide a criminal penalty for insurrection, which was instead introduced by the Confiscation Act of 1862. So this would have been back around the Civil War. The 1807 Act had been modified twice. In 1861, a new section was added allowing the federal government to use the National Guard and armed forces against the will of the state government in the case of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. And there you go. And not only the authority of the government of the United States, but remember up here, to deprive people of their constitutional rights, which gets into riots. Anticipation of continued unrest after the Civil War. 1871, the Third Enforcement Act revised the section to protect Black Americans from attacks by the Ku Klux Klan. The language added at the time allowed for the federal government to use the act to enforce the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. This section of the act was invoked during the Reconstruction era and again during the desegregation fights during the Civil Rights era. Clause of the Insurrection Act in its original 1807 wording, since updated to modern legal English, reads, an act authorizing the employment of the land and employment of the land and naval forces of the United States in case of insurrections. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that in all cases of insurrection or obstruction to the laws, either of the United States or any individual state or territory where it is lawful for the President of the United States to call forth the militia for the purpose of suppressing such insurrection or of causing the law to be duly executed. It shall be lawful for him to employ, for the same purpose, such part of the land or naval forces of the United States as shall be judged necessarily, having first observed all the prerequisites of the law in that respect. So just off the Insurrection Act of 1807 right here, he's already has by them attacking the federal facilities. In 2016, public law was amended to include Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands under Chapter 13 jurisdiction, use of militia and armed forces. So Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands did not fall underneath this until 2016. Where the President considers the unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state or use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion. Application. We're going to get into a little bit of history here of it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and continue. We're in the Insurrection Act of 1807. So this is going to be the application of the Insurrection Act. This is on Wikipedia, so you can't believe word for word. I did notice earlier it said armed rebellion when the act actually doesn't state armed rebellion. It just states rebellion. So not everything can be taken word for word here. The Insurrection Act The Insurrection Act has been invoked many times throughout American history. Oh, right there. The Insurrection Act has been invoked many times throughout American history. And what do we hear right now with the news media and with the politicians, mainly the Democrat ones from these so-called sanctuary cities? It's the first time in history Trump is wanting to send in troops. It's the first time in history he's a fascist, he's a dictator. For those that knows history, we already know that troops have been sent onto American soil several times in the past. Matter of fact, the first president, George Washington, it's called the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish reading this. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was invoked during labor conflicts. Later in the 20th century, it was used to enforce federal mandated desegregation, with Dwight D. Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy invoking the act in opposition to the affected states' political leaders to enforce court-ordered desegregation. Okay, I thought it was Johnson, but I guess it was Dwight D. Eisenhower and JFK that invoked that act. More recently, governors have requested and received support from the following looting in the aftermath of Hurricane Hugo in '89 and during the '92 Los Angeles riots. So here is two instances where the states actually asked for the federal government for deployment, and they did. In 2005, the George W. Bush administration considered intervening in the state of Louisiana in response to the Hurricane Katrina, despite the refusal from the Louisiana's governor. But this was inconsistent with the past precedent. On June 1st, 2020, President Donald Trump warned that he would invoke the act in response to the George Floyd protests. In his official statement, Trump urged every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers to reestablish law and order until the violence had been quelled. Federal officers talked Trump out of invoking the Insurrection Act. So Trump can't The Insurrection Act has not been changed. Trump can use it. He can use it during a riot. He can use it during any type of rebellion that he would see fit. Congress would have the authority to do an impeachment if they feel like he was going overboard with it. And they could have a trial in the Senate if that's what they choose to do. But Republicans mainly control that. That's what they fear. But yes, should he call upon it? I would say that he should have called upon it the first time, but it's probably good that he didn't. He might have not have ever got reelected. I don't know. But yeah, whenever they was having the riots in Minnesota and Wisconsin and those places, a number of the states over the George Floyd incident, yeah, he should have actually called upon it, because you had states allowing these rioters and allowing these people to deprive other people of property. Anytime that you're taking something of somebody else, you're depriving them of their property. If you're stealing it, if you're vandalizing it, if you're breaking windows, that's vandalizing. So if you're doing any of that stuff, you are depriving the other person of their rights. And if local law enforcement isn't going to do anything about it, then state government is supposed to do something about it. And if the state government is unwilling to do something about it, then the President of the United States has the authority to call in on the Insurrection Act and send troops in, whether or not they like it or not. And the judges have no say in it. Absolutely, they have no say. Supreme Court might be able to come down and rule on the act itself, on whether or not the act itself would be constitutional. I'd have to look up court rulings on that in the past with the Supreme Court. But all that you guys got to do is just look up this information yourself, look up the laws. I am not a lawyer, nor am I going to pretend to be a lawyer, but I do know how to read, and I do know how to understand the meaning of the words. A lot of times, it's stupid. I've faced people before that's in office in certain areas, and I would bring up certain elements of the Constitution or certain elements of law, and they would act like I'm supposed to be a lawyer to know that. And my response would be, you don't need to be a lawyer to know the definition of words. And you don't. Just look it up and read it. I'm not telling you to go to court or anything using this, but you have the knowledge there. You can actually look it up for yourself and say, okay, this is what I can do. This is what's permissible. If anything's in question, do get a lawyer. Make sure. But if you have at least some info when these people come at you for anything and you deliver that info to them, it will make them think twice before they cross the line. So kind of the same thing here whenever it comes to the Insurrection Act in these states that are blindly just sitting by and allowing people to be robbed and allowing their streets to be chaotic like they are. Once a president calls in the Insurrection Act and sends in the troops, and these people actually spend some time in actual jail for assaulting a federal officer, they could bring state charges on some of the criminal, but the state won't bring the charges. So the federal officers could bring the charges for violation, depriving rights. Not only would you have assault, you'd also have charges for depriving rights of the people that you have vandalized their shops. I'll try to get to some videos the next time of some of the so-called peaceful protests and the No Kings Day. Yeah, that was a great one. You should see what some of those people are actually saying with Charlie Kirk and all that crap. Yeah, they were pretty much peaceful, but there were some videos where they weren't so peaceful. And that's what gets me with the protesters. They should be delivering up the problems within their organizations, but most of the time their problems are the organizations that's actually assembling, dealing with Antifa, dealing with George Soros. Anyway, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Hit the like button down below. Subscribe, it helps us out. For those interested in travel, please go over, help us out over there. Ready, Set, Travel. Take a look at some of our travel videos. If you just want to get away from all the nonsense and enjoy a game every now and then, go over to WeBe Games, where I like to play games, and you can join me over there. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you later.